He came home with news that could have changed her life forever. But before he could speak, she handed him the divorce papers. That single moment, two pieces of paper, one trembling hand, ended everything. She thought she was ending a marriage. He knew she was ending his last chance to say the truth. Because what she didn't know was that the man she was leaving had just returned from the hospital with the news that would have rewritten both their destinies. Hello, family. Welcome to African Stories That Touch. Please subscribe, like this video, and share it with your loved ones. Don't forget to turn on post notifications so you don't miss any of our powerful stories. Now, sit back and listen carefully because this story will leave you speechless. The evening was heavy, the air full of Hamilton dust, and the low hum of traffic from the street below their Lekki apartment. The curtains breathed softly with the wind. Neriah stood by the glass door, still wearing her office suit, her hands clenched tight, when Darian stepped in quietly. He was tall, handsome, but looked tired. That kind of tiredness that doesn't just come from work, the kind that sits deep in the soul. He dropped his car keys on the table, the sound sharp in the silence. "Hey," he said softly. She didn't turn. "You are late again." He smiled faintly. That old, weary smile that used to melt her once, back when the world was still simple. "Traffic," he murmured. She finally faced him. There was no softness left in her eyes. "It's always traffic, Darian. Always something. But somehow you find time to answer every call that comes in after midnight, don't you?" Her words hung in the air like smoke, bitter and slow to fade. Darian blinked, confused for a heartbeat, then simply sighed. "Neriah, please, not tonight." But she was already reaching into her bag. Her fingers shook as she brought out the envelope. "No, Darian, it has to be tonight." She handed it to him. Those crisp white papers that smelled faintly of ink and perfume and heartbreak. He stared at them for a long time. Then, without a word, he sat down. There was something about his silence that unnerved her. He didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't even ask why. He just looked at her, as if memorizing her face for the last time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You really want this?" Her jaw tightened. "I do." He nodded slowly. "Then, give me a pen." She hesitated. Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. But pride, That quiet poison pushed her forward. She reached for the pen on the table and handed it over. He signed, one slow stroke after another, then placed the pen down gently. She waited for him to speak, maybe to beg, maybe to confess. But instead, he pulled out his phone. "Who are you calling?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. He didn't answer. He just pressed a number, his eyes never leaving hers. A man answered on the other end, a deep, formal voice. Darian spoke softly. "It's done. Change everything as discussed tonight." Then he ended the call. Neriah frowned. "What are you talking about?" Darian smiled faintly. "You'll find out soon enough." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked towards the door. "Darian," she called, her voice rising. "Don't you dare walk out on me." He stopped at the door, turned slightly, just enough for the light to catch his eyes. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "but I guess life wanted it this way." And then he left. The silence that followed felt heavier than grief. Neriah stood there, staring at the door, confusion and guilt swirling in her chest. She told herself she didn't care, that it was his fault, his distance, his secrecy, his long nights away. But that night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spin lazily above her, she couldn't shake the image of his eyes. So calm, yet so sad. It had not always been this way. There was a time when laughter filled their home. Back when Darian was still that young architect with big dreams, and Neriah, a rising banker with eyes full of fire. They met at a wedding, not their friend's wedding. Strangers, really. But fate had a way of sitting two restless souls side by side. He spilled juice on her dress. She glared at him, furious. He apologized with such genuine panic that she couldn't help but laugh. And that was it. 2 weeks later, they were inseparable. He loved her ambition. She loved his calm. He called her my sunrise. She called him my peace. They built dreams together. A little house in Surulere that they painted themselves. Sunday mornings were spent with burnt toast and gospel music. Late nights, well, drives with no destination. But time has a way of wearing love down when both hearts stop tending it. Darian got busier with work, then started traveling for mysterious projects. Neriah got promoted, became consumed by her career, At first, it was just missed calls. Then, it was missed birthdays. Then, silence. And when silence becomes the language of your marriage, love doesn't die loudly. It just fades quietly, like light at dusk. By the time Neriah found the unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, she didn't ask questions. She just stopped waiting for answers. She told herself she was done, that she deserved better. She didn't know that the scent wasn't perfume, it was disinfectant from the hospital. Days passed after the divorce, then weeks, and Neriah tried to convince herself that life was moving on. She returned to work, laughed when she had to, scrolled through social media, pretending not to search for his name. But at night, the silence pressed down on her chest like weight. Darian hadn't called, not once. She told herself that was fine, that this was freedom. Yet, sometimes she would catch herself listening for the sound of his car on the street, that old engine cough that always announced him. Then, one evening, about 6 weeks later, she stopped at a cafe after work. A TV hung in the corner, playing the evening news. She wasn't watching until she heard the name. The reclusive billionaire, Darian Adewale, CEO of Oren Holdings, has just donated 500 million naira to the National Cancer Foundation. The cup slipped from her hand. Coffee splashed over the table. She turned to the screen, and there he was, her husband, smiling, standing beside the president, cameras flashing. It couldn't be him, but it was. Same eyes, same calm, just dressed in power she had never known. People in the cafe were clapping. She just sat frozen, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She whispered, Darian? A man nearby laughed, nudging his friend. Ah, that man. He's one of the richest in Africa. Nobody even knew what he looked like till today. Can you imagine? Neriah couldn't breathe. She left the cafe without paying. That night, she called every number she knew. His phone was off. She emailed him. No reply. She even drove to their old house in Surulere. It was locked. Curtains were drawn. Dust on the gate. 4 weeks later, she saw another headline. Business magnate Darian Adewale passes away weeks after public appearances. Her knees buckled. The paper fell from her hands. She sank onto the curb. People walked past without even seeing the woman whose world had just caved in. He was gone, and she had divorced him just weeks before he died. For hours she sat there, her tears mixing with the city dust. That night, a courier knocked on her apartment door. A plain brown package without a sender's name was handed to her. Inside was a small flash drive and a note written in his handwriting. Play this when you are alone. Her fingers trembled as she plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered. Then his face appeared. Pale, thinner, yet smiling gently. Hi, Neriah. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. She gasped, covering her mouth. I wanted to tell you everything about who I really am, about the illness, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd love me out of pity. Afraid you'd stay for the wrong reasons. So I went away for treatment quietly. When I realized it was too late, I came home that night to tell you the truth and to give you something that would have changed our lives. He looked down for a moment, fighting the emotion. But you gave me the papers first. I knew then that you were done, not just with the marriage, but with me. So I made a call to my lawyer. I changed the will. Everything that was meant for you, I donated instead. Not out of anger, but because I wanted my last act to be love, not revenge. He smiled faintly. You once told me I was your peace. Maybe I can still bring peace to others, even if I failed to bring it to us. Then silence. Neriah sat frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. She whispered through the sobs, "Why didn't you tell me, Darian? Why? Why didn't you just let me see you?" The video ended with his last words. If only you knew, Neriah. If only you knew. The laptop screen went black. Outside, the city kept humming. Horns, voices, life, moving on as if nothing had changed. But inside our small apartment, a woman knelt before her own regrets. She remembered his smile, his patience, the mornings she ignored him, the nights she accused him. Every memory cut deeper than the last. He had loved her even as he was dying. He had tested her, and she had failed without even knowing the test existed. For weeks, she shut herself away. The neighbors thought she had traveled. Her phone rang endlessly. Friends, clients, but she answered no one. Sometimes she would play the video again just to hear his voice. Sometimes she would imagine what would have happened if she had waited one more hour before handing him those papers. Just 1 hour. 1 hour could have rewritten her life. Months later, she visited his grave, a quiet marble stone under a jacaranda tree in Ikoyi Cemetery. She knelt and placed her hand on the cold surface. "I saw the foundation you built," she whispered. "The children you're helping. I see now. You left your love in the world, even if you took it away from me." The wind rustled through the purple flowers above her. She stayed there until sunset, whispering stories to the wind, hoping somehow he could hear. And when she finally stood to leave, the city lights were coming on, glittering, distant, and sad, just like memories. Sometimes, when people speak of Darian Adewale, they talk about the billionaire who gave his fortune to charity. But the old housemaid who once worked for them knows a different story. She says, if you listen closely, on quiet nights, you can still hear a woman crying softly by the window, whispering the same words over and over. If only I knew. If only I knew. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And stay tuned for the next one.